legacy. The need to focus on creating multi-generational wealth is more critical now than ever. I can think of no better time for this conversation and no better panelists than the two we're lucky enough to be joined with today. Shirley Ann Robertson is a second generation financial professional who began her career with Prudential before founding her firm in Schaumburg, Illinois, Robertson and Robertson, 29 years ago today. Congratulations on that, Shirley Ann. We're also joined by Tiffany Aliche, better known as the Budgetnista. She is a personal finance educator who has helped more than 1 million people, largely women, better manage their daily money management habits in an effort to fuel their longer term goals and dreams. Shirley Ann and Tiffany, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
You know, this is such an extraordinary time, and I want to ask you both, starting with Shirley Ann, at a time when we are struggling financially day to day, so many of us, and the future is so uncertain. There's a lot of emphasis on our short-term goals. How do we now also incorporate our longer-term goals? How do we even begin to do that?
Wow. So thank you so much for having me here, Caroline. I'm always excited to be a part of anything that Black Enterprise does. So when the ask was made, I said, yes, yes, yes. But to speak to your question, you know, short term, long term, you know, I would say to you that this moment of COVID is what all of us have been living in for the last going on almost a year now. But COVID resembles the situation of one, if you're living in this moment, you might have experienced job loss, or your hours at work have been reduced, or because you became sick, you might have had some disabilities going on. Or the one that's most crushing is death, the death of a loved one. So when we're talking about short-term, long-term, I say to you that the short-term means that we've got to have cash on hand. And so that's critical. So that helps you get through, helps you manage through this moment right now where you are experiencing that job loss or reduction in hours. I would also say to you that now, again, with the fact of talking about short term, look at the fact of making sure that you're being very diligent with your cash on hand. Have you gone through all your expenses to make sure that you're really maximizing whatever discounts you can get? And then now we transcend those dollars that we've saved into using that money to make sure we can pay for the long-term needs. And those long-term needs, folks, life insurance. We have no idea when we will be called home. But when we do, we have to make sure that we have those necessities in place. It's not if something is going to happen, it's when, and when it does, will you have all these necessary items, short-term needs, as well as financial long-term needs to take care of yourself and your family.
Tiffany, how do you, educate people around this whole issue of long-term? Because I know often you're really focused on, the day-to-day, get your house in order, get out of debt, get on with your life so that you can be prepared for the long-term. But what do you encourage people to emphasize and sort of shift their thinking around the longer term versus just getting through the now?
So I actually play a fun game with them. I don't know if you know Carolyn, but I used to actually be a preschool teacher before I started the Budgetnista. And I know people are still kind of kids at heart and they need something to hold on to. And this is something I did for myself. I actually named my older self and I named her Wanda because Wanda seems like a sassy older lady name. And so as I'm making choices, started this in my 20s. As I'm making choices, I think to myself, how will this affect Wanda? Because we disassociate ourselves. I think it was Prudential that did a study that showed that people, you are disassociated from your older self. You don't see your older self as part of you now. Just like it's very difficult to think about your younger self when you were a child as who you are now as well. And so you disassociate. So instead of trying to fuse those two people together, I said, well, why not lean into it? Why not say, yes, Wanda is this separate person that I need to look after, almost as if I'm looking after my grandmother. So I'm making these choices now. How will this affect Wanda? If I take money from my retirement account now, what will Wanda eat? I'll make jokes with myself, like Wanda's like, oh, really? So another trip on a credit card. Okay. So you mean oodles and noodles of me when I get older? Great. And so my friends and I started to play that game with each other. But what I found is that it actually was really useful and helpful with getting people to see themselves outside of themselves and to make choices that were not just good for them now, but for their Wandas later. So I encourage people to name your older self because it's truly your younger self job to look after your older self. Give your older self a personality. Think of your older self, bring it up as you're making choices because the things that you do now don't just affect you now, it also affects your future Wanda.
I think that's such an awesome way to sort of play a mind game on yourself because we do have trouble sort of really
Mhm.
projecting into the future and owning it. Shirley Ann, as Tiffany talks about Wanda, and you mentioned insurance as a financial tool that can be
Yeah.
critical for creating intergenerational wealth. Sort of how does one go about establishing priorities? Tiffany mentioned what's Wanda going to eat, right? But as we think about creating multi-generational wealth, what do you tell your clients to really prioritize?
So I first have to kind of walk them off the edge, Caroline, because it does feel sometimes like you're drinking water from a fire hose. There's all these different things that we should be doing. And so you become overwhelmed with where do I start now and which one, how do I prioritize? Well, that's the value of sort of engaging with somebody like myself. So the conversation first starts with, let's look at your day-to-day spending and make sure that you can absolutely find some dollars because the generational wealth part of it is huge. So here it is, you give me a small amount of money and I'm able to take that small amount of money and transcend that to a big check. So if the Lord does call you home, what that will do for your family is significant. So this year, right around the month of May, I got a call from my aunt that my uncle, uncle who has been around forever, has seen me grow up into the person I am today, was suddenly had a massive heart attack and passed away. Now, here it is, my uncle was 68, enjoying retirement. But now here is his wife who's left my aunt. So this life insurance check is able to preserve that family, preserve my aunt's situation. Now transcend that to somebody who's younger, somebody who's in their 30s. That's why I always say, look at it from a standpoint where if you are not here, how will your family survive without you, without the dollars that you bring into the household? So generational wealth starts with you and I having a conversation. What consistent amount can you afford per month? And we take those dollars, Caroline, and move that into a life insurance policy that upon the date of your death, Prudential within 7 days will have a check out to your family to make sure that the life that you started with your family is preserved. So generational wealth using a small amount of dollars into a huge payout. And I don't mean from a standpoint of cashing in on somebody's death, but that's how you leave your family intact so that they're not compromised in this moment of financial crisis.
Shirley, and it reminds me of the first time I went to Nigeria. My parents are Nigerian. And the first time I went to the village, my dad was showing me one of my uncles had this huge palm tree farm. And he said, when a man plants a palm tree, he does so for his descendants, not him. And I said, well, why? Because palm trees take almost up to like 60, 70 years or more before they grow into a tree that will yield the fruit that will yield palm oil. So for my uncle to have a palm tree farm, not his father, but his great grandfather and his great grandfather had to think of him then before he was even born or here. And so I think so many of us are not planting palm trees because we're thinking of just the now, but if you do it right, you can make sure that your descendants and your descendants don't ever have to worry. My uncle is wealthy as a result of someone thinking of him before he even got here.
And Tiffany,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Caroline.
I was just going to say he's also wealthy because of ownership, right?
Yes.
And this is something, Tiffany, that I know you are a massive proponent of ownership, both of you, I know. And in our community, this is something that we sort of continue to struggle with. And prior to COVID, really the nation was sort of shifting away from really valuing the the generational benefits of ownership. Can you both speak to that? Tiffany, you want to start?
Sure. You're right that ownership equals wealth. You know,
Absolutely.
that debt freedom doesn't equal wealth, although debt freedom is a goal, it is not the goal. And unfortunately, in Black and Brown communities, studies have been shown that our core desired outcome with our finances have been to be debt free.
Mhm.
And while everyone else, their desired outcome is to grow wealth. Well, I always get some pushback from our people, but I'm like, you know who else is debt free? I have a 5-year-old nephew, Roman. He doesn't have a car note. He doesn't have a mortgage. He doesn't have student loans. But every time Roman comes here, he doesn't put any money in on for pizza or the cookies or the cupcakes that I buy him. Roman is debt free and Roman is broke. That debt freedom is not wealth. It is a goal, not the goal. And so that's what I wish that we understood more. And I think that understanding that wealth is one of the corners where ownership is the cornerstone for wealth. It's just true. I look at my parents, their house is paid off. They bought that house for $250,000 30 years ago. It is now worth $700,000. That's wealth. The house that I live in now, my husband and I purchased it. It was a foreclosure. We purchased it for cash and we renovated it cash. That is wealth. We own this house. We have other properties. I own my businesses. So these are things, you know, you own it if you can pass it along from not just you, but your children and your children's children. And I just wish we understood that more, that there are so many ways to own things and not selling out so quickly. And that means selling out, meaning that, you know, like sometimes people see success as selling out, but meaning selling ourselves short. I'll give you an example. I wrote a children's book. Happy Birthday, Molly Moore. It is this, well, I'll show you this beautiful little brown girl, because I was like, we need to see, this is how I looked when I was her age. It teaches age appropriate financial education to preschoolers and kindergartners. So I posted a copy of this book before it was even printed. I posted a copy of the cover on my Instagram, and a huge, one of the top 5 publishing companies in the world reached out to me and said, we would like to buy the book from you. And I thought, okay, well, how much? I already knew I wasn't looking to sell it. I said, well, how much are you looking to purchase, you know, the rights to the book? They wanted to give me $25,000. Now, that's not a little bit of money, but I said, I think I can do better, right? And I did. This book has been out 3 or 4 months, and now we did a Kickstarter, raised $70,000. I just signed a contract for a public school system that's buying $70,000 worth of the book. The United Way just bought $20,000 worth of that book. We're looking at almost $200,000. I own this book 100%. I would have sold this for $25,000. They would have gone on to make the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the future. But so many of us look at that short-term gain, but don't realize it's a long-term loss. Maintain ownership as long as you can.
Yeah, yeah.
But everything you're saying there is all around looking at the knowledge. So you over time have gained this knowledge, Tiffany. And that's where I always sort of marvel at the fact that, you know, you have to stay informed, right, Caroline? You have to look at the fact where, you know, you, Black Enterprise, has been a wealth of knowledge for so many of us. But, you know, I know for sure, if it weren't for my mother who sat me down when I started with Prudential some 20 odd years ago, and she said, Shirley-Ann, before you can sell it to anybody else, you have to first own it. So she made sure I bought my first $1 million worth of life insurance. My sister and brother were my beneficiaries. And so they looked at me kind of with a side eye, kind of thirsty, because they wanted some of that money. And then she made sure I had my savings account. She made sure I had put money towards my retirement plans, my 401k. So all of these financial products, it was my mother who made me start by doing all these necessary things. So planning for the worst, but hoping for the best. It's not if something's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And so it's all around understanding that these financial conversations, Caroline and Tiffany, are so necessary. So it's you having a conversation with your young kids so that they understand, okay, so we're going to the grocery store, we're going to buy this particular item. That's all we're buying. But then also too, you mom and dad showing your kids, if something were to happen to me, I want to make sure that both you guys, all of you, stay in this house. So that's why I'm sitting down and making sure I'm talking to Shirley-Ann, the financial advisor, so she can explain to you and give you clarity on understanding all these financial stuff, because it does feel overwhelming. There's so many different angles in how to navigate through this financial conversation. But the one piece I say is that it does feel daunting. And the key is to realize that it's never going to be a set it and forget it, there's always an ongoing evolving piece of it. Just like you've evolved from one space, Tiffany, to now you're doing $70,000 versus a $25,000 offer. So all these opportunities are there for you.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask is, it's one thing to have a long-term
Mhm.
financial plan, but oftentimes people will make a plan. You see this happen often with
Yeah.
estate planning, to the extent like people say, oh, I made a will. And then 20, 30 years go by.
Mhm.
Your entire life has changed. Your
Mhm.
entire financial reality has changed. You never bothered to update it. And in fact, something happens and you're not covered and things don't go the way you would have because you never updated it. How often should you update a financial plan, a long-term one? Sit down, really look at it,
Yeah.
and make the necessary revisions. Shirley Ann, you want to start out?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a necessary conversation to have at a minimum once a year, Caroline. Necessary. You see, life changes, through these little increments. A child is born, or you buy a new house, or you have a job change. Or one of your spouses gets sick, or you get sick. So all of those are life event changes. And so I always view it from a standpoint where from year to year, at a very minimum, every 6 months, I'm in touch with my clients. What's going on with you? Where are you at? And it's the intent behind that is twofold. One, my goal is to stretch you from where you are now and move you to that next financial level. Because where you are today is for this moment. But then my role is to sort of introduce to you that next level of planning. So let's look at the fact where long-term care insurance right now has been a huge conversation having with clients as we get older. So when you first started out, you probably didn't have enough dollars, but now we need to look at adding long-term care. Or if you have a young family, you have one child, now we need to add, now we've got 2 kids, we need more life insurance, or you bought more properties. So there's always going to be that next level of planning, Caroline, that it's always necessary to have those conversations. Don't view it as a set it and forget it. It's necessary to have ongoing financial conversations because you've got the financial journey and my role is to help you get there.
Tiffany, once a year at least, is that your thinking also?
Yes, I OD. So I meet with my financial advisor. I meet with her every quarter because I'm like, I like to know like what's happening, what's going on. And I'm sure Shirley Ann, you have the open book too, where they can email you at any time, at the very least. Yes, she has suggested to me at least once a year. But what I love is that it's like also like financial couples counseling because my husband and we Zoom call. And in the beginning, you can see he was like eyes rolling, like, oh gosh. But then he realized like, this is important, like this is we're trying to have a child. We have Alyssa, my stepdaughter. So what's going to happen with her? So he's realizing like, oh, as we move toward our goals together, he's realizing just how important having these conversations are and how important it is for him to understand what's happening. Not just, this is not one of those like, my wife has got it or my husband has got it. No, because if something were to happen, you need to know, what's the game plan. When I was a kid, I can remember every time my parents traveled together, they used to have this manila envelope with all of their things in it. And they would show us, this is our will. There's another copy in our safe deposit box. This is our, they would show us all of our, my father was a CFO and an accountant. And so he would show us all their financials just in case something happened. So even though it would be scary to think about, something happening to them, we knew where we could find all of those things. And it was because he was constantly updating them. So it's super important to keep in contact with whatever financial advisor, financial planner, whoever it is that you're working with, because as you develop and grow, it's like going to your doctor. You're not 40 still going to your pediatrician. You don't have the same body. And so you're wanting to evolve alongside your financial planner and advisor.
You use the word scary. I think it can be, and Shirley Ann, you talked about this, it can be so daunting to just consider these issues. But I think for some people, it can also be daunting to meet with a financial professional, just that idea. So, Tiffany, you mentioned you meet with yours every quarter. Sort of, you share what your checklist is when you talk to your financial professional?
Yes. In the beginning, and I'm sure Shirley Ann can attest to this, basically it's to get all up in your business sessions, right? So what about this? Or what about what are your goals? How much do you have in savings? What about your credit? So I had to share everything, be like financially exposed. So that's what it looked like in the beginning. It was the first few sessions, it was just her collecting data. And then also her asking my husband and I, what are your goals? Because I want to look at where you are, but what I've collected and where you say you want to be, and where's the gap in that. So right now we are in a good space where we are, I'm actively working toward the goal. She has all of our information. Like, for example, Charlene, I didn't know I was underinsured. She was like, girl, ma'am, you have this successful business. If something were to happen to you, she's like, no. My business just hit 8 figures this year. And she's like, with this insurance you got when you were 27, what are we doing with this? This is not enough. And so that's actually what we're going through right now. She's like literally saying, this is where you are, this is where you ought to be, and slowly but surely working us and walking us to that desired outcome. Because even though I teach personal financial education, but I teach the foundational things. This is how you budget. This is how you save. This is how you get out of debt and credit. But there are next level financial things once you build that foundation that you should look for help for. You really should not do it alone. The first time I met with a financial advisor, I think I was like 17 or 18. My dad had one come to the house to talk to us because he wanted to normalize that even me with my master's and my MBA in finance and economics, I have a financial advisor here with me. And I want you to see how normal that is. He's coming to the house. He's going to talk to you. And I remember I'd saved up $2,000 worth of babysitting money. And I made, I made my first investments through him. And so, I think asking for help, finding someone you feel really comfortable with, that's really important. Shirley has a great personality. Not all financial advisors are created equal. So you definitely want to find someone that you feel comfortable sharing your deepest, darkest financial secrets with. But asking for help is critical. Doing it alone is not the way to go.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head when you said that. It is the role of what we do is finding those little roadblocks that you didn't realize that there was an underinsured situation happening. And that's, again, the value of having these conversations, is so that somebody can point these things out to you. And also, too, provide that cold water. So many times, I had one of my clients that said to me, Shirley, I'm trying to retire by 55. I said, okay, well, let's see what that looks like. And when we went through the numbers, and she realized, oh, well, maybe I thought I was going to retire. You need that accountability factor, is what I would call it, that accountability factor that keeps you locked in step to make sure that you're going to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And then, the constant revisiting to make sure that whatever new products that are out there, you stay ahead of the game. I hit on long-term care insurance and life insurance. Those are the two things where we as a community sometimes, just like you said, Tiffany, you were underinsured. And long-term care is something where we're saying, well, don't worry, my kids will take care of me. Well, how about having the resources for your kids to take care of you? I will say to you, my parents are now retired in Palm Beach. And what gives me joy is knowing that, one, my mother have done the proper planning for herself. But, as being an advisor over the years, but the truth of it is they have got all the necessary financial things in place to make sure that not if something is going to happen, but when it does, they'll be provided for.
Yeah, I have to say my parents are sadly both gone. They were educators their whole lives. They didn't make a ton of money, but they were so responsible with their money that, their care was handled throughout their whole lives. They were never a burden to me financially, which extends that relief and that freedom to my children and their children, because you can easily go into debt caring for yourself or caring for elders. And that has residual consequences for multiple generations. So just enormous blessings there. Before we go, and I could talk to you both all day, can you leave everyone with 2 specific bits of advice, just nuggets, be they lessons from your practice, Shirley-Ann, or, personal experience of yours that can really be game changers for people as they consider this area going forward. Tiffany, let's start with you.
So my 2 nuggets would be to start now. One, to start now. I waited because I'd experienced really a traumatic investing experience with a friend of mine when I was in my late 20s, and he ended up stealing $35,000 from me. And because of that, I was afraid to invest. I was afraid to move beyond where I was financially because up until then I was financially perfect. And so I waited and I waited and I waited. And now I didn't really start getting back on my feet again until my mid 30s. And I wish I hadn't, because you cannot regain that. You cannot regain compounding interest that you've lost. And I just wish, it doesn't matter how small, start now. You could do 10 bucks a month, put it in savings until it adds up into something that you can invest. When I got my first policy, my first life insurance policy when I think I was like 26, 27, because I bought a condo and I didn't want it to be a burden if I wasn't there. I think I was paying like $23 a month or something, really, because that's all I could afford. I could only afford term at that time, but at least I knew, okay, if something happens to me, someone can take care of this property. So starting now, no matter how small. And two, don't go it alone. There is an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. Ask for help. One of the reasons why I was able to stop the waiting and to break past the fear is that I found my financial advisor, Anjali. She was the hand holding that I needed. Even though I knew, I'm like, Tiffany, you work in this industry, but it was so hard for me to get out of my way. I was the doctor that was not going to my own appointments. I was the hairdresser whose hair was a mess, And so start now, no matter how small, and do not do it alone. Ask for help.
Yeah.
Shirley Ann?
So I lived my own story where, my nuggets are, if it weren't for my mother making sure that when I joined her here at Prudential, she sat me down and made sure that I had the life insurance, disability insurance, savings accounts, funding my retirement, and then fast forward, having an auto accident and having to learn how to walk and talk again. That savings account was what helped me cover some expenses because my disability insurance only covered me for 60% of my paycheck. So the savings covered me for the additional 40. The car insurance that my mother had made sure that I was recovered for the 1 year I was off of work. The long-term care policy allowed me to stay in my house so that a nurse would come to me and take care of me. So all of the insurances that I talk about, I live it, I own it, I understand it. And so that's why when I impart my guidance to my clients, it is saying that if I didn't have it, where would I have been? And so the other part of that is, taking action and not feeling so overwhelmed or not feeling embarrassed. Because so many times I meet people and they say, I'm too embarrassed to talk to a financial professional. I want you to use this as the opportunity to take action. Use this as your call to action moment, where this situation of COVID that we're living in, folks, it's anything. We're all living in it together. You've got to take action, but start by realizing that doing it with somebody, just like Tiffany mentioned, it does not feel so alone. It does not feel so daunting. And so I share with you my own life experiences, that my life experience is the reason why today I stand so proudly financially and why I use my knowledge to give to my clients. And then also too, on the flip side is take my knowledge and use it for yourself. That is not if something is going to happen, it's when, and when it does, will you be prepared?
Thank you both so much for fantastic advice. I think in this moment, when so many people still are feeling very much alone, it's important to hear you both say, this moment is not going to last forever.
No.
So you want to call yourself Wanda or whatever you need to think well beyond it. And then we're not alone. So don't go it alone as you consider what you have to do to create generational wealth for your family. Hopefully there's long life ahead, healthy life for everyone. And we want to be well prepared and well positioned individually as a community to greet every opportunity that comes. Thank you both so much. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.